What's up, everybody? This is Dan Physics with Ex Machina Soundworks, and we're here again today with Joel Bruyere from the Drawing Room Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. How you doing, Joel?
I'm doing great, Dan. You did also
Great.
like remarkable job on that name pronunciation, so kudos to you.
I had to practice it. Yeah, it's like I was saying before, like it's a little bit of a tongue twister, but you just got to roll with it a couple times, and I guess you get the hang of it. So yeah, I guess we'll get started here. Just start off with some of the questions. Just give us a little insight about what it is you do.
Yeah, I so for about 20 years I toured as a bass player and an owner of a Canadian active rock band called Thousand Foot Crutch. The whole time that we were touring, I obviously adored that aspect of it, being in a band, playing together. But I also, this is a story that a lot of people have, but I've always been enamored with the recording process and the production process and everything that goes on, behind the glass. And was fortunate enough during that period of time to work with some great producers, some great engineers. And the one thing I will say that time has taught me. I just wish I was able to be in the mind frame that I am today during those periods of time, because we work with some incredible engineers that I still respect to this day. And just being able to do it from my perspective now versus back then is something that I've constantly, I adore learning. I adore being part of this process. And what a gift it was back then to work with a lot of these engineers. But so coming off of the road, I had been slowly building several different iterations of what is the drawing room today.
Mhm.
I got to a spot where I was like, okay, we're all at a stage of life where we're home more than we're on the road. And I still have so much that I want to do from a production and engineering standpoint. So I kept iterating on studios and getting better at what my space was like. And all still the whole while being in Canada, and then transitioned. We had been based out of Nashville for the entirety of our career. Our booking agency was here. We had some label mates that were here. And so it seemed like a natural progression to build a studio in Nashville. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, about going on 10 years now, we moved down here and made the Nashville version of the drawing room that still sits today, and spent a long time putting that together. But yeah, I split my time pretty evenly between both working on the production side of things and on the mixing and engineering side of things now.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're not doing the band stuff nearly as much anymore at all.
No, ironically, as a side, bit to that, we are coming up on, obviously, for doing it for that long, we've had some milestones and some anniversaries. We happen to be in a spot right now where one of the our first independent record has just crossed a 10-year anniversary. And so I have been tasked with remixing. I was not the original mix engineer, but remixing the record, and we're doing some feature vocalists and things. But that's kind of the only thing that I'm working on with the band at this point in time. But from a very different capacity than being a bass player and a touring owner. So
Is that an interesting sort of change of perspective?
it definitely is. I think that well, like right on the nose, the easiest part of it, going back and listening to what rock mixes sounded like and felt like in the early 2000s and mid 2000s versus how things, sonically sit in the 2020s and on. It's just so
Hmm.
different. So even that process alone it's been interesting to try and think about. It's given me a brand new respect for what a mix engineer can impart given a multi-track, and being able to really manipulate what you get, because this was tracked so long ago. And yet I haven't really had a difficult time making it feel and sound modern, just through EQ and compression, go figure. So and not really having to have to really retrack things. Now, granted, it's only 10 years old, but still within that 10-year period, I feel like active rock, the genre of rock in general, has changed so much sonically that,
Hmm.
you know, I just assumed I was going to struggle a lot more than I have remixing these things. I would have liked to have had a guitar DI, because back then, you know, the boogie triple rec was such a studio staple, and there's something about the top end in that particular head that we cut with that. You know, I've been fighting a little bit of that, more than I'd care
Hmm.
to, but that's just me making excuses. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I've never. It's interesting. Like I've never had a situation in my own like work where something that I wrote, I ended up coming back to later and doing like a remix, or I've remixed other people but never had that scenario. So that's why I asked that question. I'm like, it's sort of interesting, and like, I wonder what that would be like if I got asked to remix something I did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, like what kind of perspective that would be. But so I appreciate that.
it's been
I guess just
fun.
what
Yeah, it's been a lot of
go ahead.
fun. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, go ahead. That's cool. I'm if this is an interview of you, not of me. So,
Oh yeah,
I
no,
was
you're
going to
fine.
ask you,
I
like,
was
what
just
are,
gonna say, like, to that point, I always forget we have a lag too. So sorry if you have to do a lot of
no
cuts.
worries.
I think that, you know, looking back at what that has been like, it was interesting for me to not. I think back to notes that I had given to engineers that were mixing our projects. I think it's given me a new respect, even though I've always felt like I respect a production comes across, you know, my table and I'm in the mix perspective, or if I'm doing a production currently and I'm sending it off to a mix engineer, what that relationship looks like and how I'm hopefully teeing them up to be, you know, or passing the baton, and it's just an extension of that project. I think back
Hmm.
to what it means now to objectively look at our entire band. Obviously, being the bass player, it is an important part of how I think about mixing that project. But like remaining objective and thinking about how do I feel? How does this make me feel? What does the whole band picture look like? How do the vote? You know, just really thinking about it. It's the first time I've looked at a project that I've been part of from with completely fresh, you know, ears and eyes. And it's been phenomenal to do it. It's just also it's just a totally different muscle that I've not done with these songs. It has been somewhat
Hmm.
fun to go back and listen to them and you know remember the years of touring and everything that surrounds those memories of those songs, and now have a whole new you know version and conversation about that. So it's been a lot of fun. I've
Interesting.
really enjoyed it.
Nice. Nice. Well, I guess the question leads into the next question. Being that we're talking about an old project, like, what are some of your early influences?
Yeah, so how I ended up in hard rock is not impossible, but it's a stretch. My dad, growing up, my dad really imparted. We grew up with East Coast Canada bluegrass in our house. My dad's a fiddle player. My first instrument that I played was fiddle, and second was mandolin, and it was very much you know roots and reels types of bluegrass, Canadian stuff. And so that was like imparted on me. My dad had a record player, and so early on, fortunately, he liked a lot of different styles of music. And I was born in the late '70s, so we had a lot of Robert Palmer, we had a lot of In Excess, we had a crap ton of Aerosmith records at our house, and then my dad also would go back and you know we had Zeppelin 4, and so I started to understand who Led Zeppelin was and what British rock was. And so I had a really, the palette that I was able to pull from a young age was pretty varied. Um,
Hmm.
there was almost no music that was off limits. You know, a lot of people are like, I only like this genre, or I like these three genres, but I don't like X. And we never
Hmm.
really fully had that. But I will say, I think my dad would attest to this, that he would have never expected that I was going to land in hard rock. So that really wasn't something that we did, right? Well, Zeppelin can lean heavy, and while certainly Beatles' White Album has some really like hard rock moments for the era.
Hmm.
Modern hard rock and what active rock was, or new metal was, certainly wasn't something that my dad was listening to. So,
Right,
um,
right.
but yeah, I think I had fortunately, just about every genre. We were fortunate enough to listen to. My brother was a huge, huge fan of, um, what was early Smashing Pumpkins and Violet Femmes and, the Breeders, and all of this era of what was the original alternative, and maybe even leaning into
Right.
the grunge era as
Hmm.
well. And as soon as I heard that, and it was, for me, it was like, yeah,
It was
there's
a
so
lock.
much more colors to choose from, and do something new and fresh. And so, yeah, so I hope that answers it, but I listen
Oh
to
yeah,
just about everything.
that's a fantastic answer. I mean, like the '80s was a wild. What you said earlier about like color and palette. Did we lose you? Yeah, like what I was saying, Zach. With the '80s being such a like as you said earlier about like a palette, like having a wide breadth of colors and palettes to choose from. I feel like that's like the '80s in general as a decade of music from pretty much any imaginable genre just had so much ground I think that was covered in that period of time. So and then you're talking about like the Violent Femmes, the Smashing Pumpkins, and that's like that's all the stuff that plus the '80s is all the stuff I grew up with too. So I'm right there with you on
Yeah.
being like, oh man, there's such ground that's covered and like such a an opportunity for new stuff. So pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
too, for me, something that I've learned from that is I forget, right? I'm obviously working in engineering and in production. It's important to have a grasp, at least to me. Some people would say otherwise, but to me, it's important to have a grasp of what is current and what's happening, and what works at certain playlists, and understanding curves of playlists and overall
mhm.
sonics of things is important. But in that, I keep trying to remind myself that it's okay to go back and dig deep and love the things that I used to love, and capture those special moments again. That to me has been a joy recently. I just 2 days ago, I mixed a band that for sure are not Aerosmith, fans, but it just felt so much like, if you remember Permanent Vacation, the track "Dude Looks Like a
Hmm.
Lady."
Yep,
And
yep.
I went back to it, and I immediately was like, there's no chance that they know, but at the same time, this is like, I'm going to pull inspiration from this, because it just feels of that era. But then of course I spent the next 45 minutes downloading every Aerosmith record and going, oh my gosh, I haven't listened to this stuff in forever, and just love it, so much. It's so good. They did so many incredible things to change what was, I guess, pop rock during that era. What they were able to do as a band, certainly Steven Tyler as a vocalist, but and that's
Mm,
like one little vignette of one band in one little era that I'm like, wow,
right.
there's just so much to learn from just listening to music and consuming music. I love that.
I get ideas all the time from songs. Just your point, like stuff you go back and you listen to that you haven't heard in a while. You're like, wait, do you like that drum sound? Like, damn, that sounds good. Or like, or a guitar tone or something. And it make you go, man, I wonder how they got that. Like, because it's a challenge. You're right that like, engineering is very much a modern, well, not modern, but in terms of you have to keep up with the times to a degree, and so like approaches and philosophies and ideas change, by almost maybe yearly at this point. But sometimes it's kind of cool to go back and be like, you gain some sort of insight and idea into like how they got a sound or they got a vibe or a tone, to like a project or to recording. So yeah, it's cool. I
Right.
like going back to that stuff. So I mean, it's like art. Like you go back and you look at a Van Gogh or a Picasso or something. Sure, that's 100+ years old, depending on which one you're talking about. But maybe it's an approach or an idea. It's like, man, you really could get away with that. you know? So
Yeah. Yeah, and to that end, you can't see because it's around the corner from here, but I love I don't own originals, of course, but I have a lot of prints of famous paintings that I remember being affected by and thinking about how did Rembrandt in that period of time look at a subject, light the subject with candles and get this like these the contrast and the shadows and everything else that was happening to create that moment where
mhm.
just groundbreaking for that period of time. And the same can be said through the art that I spend all of my time in with music and looking at, like you said, the breadth of what that can be. I have several engineer friends, and we talk about this frequently, where there was a period of time in the advent of software and the digital, aspect of what we get to do. And I remember it feeling and sounding digital to me. And I know there's been many arguments and debates, and
Sure.
over the years it's definitely changed, but there was a period of time where I just preferred something that was done on 2-inch, was done on a console. Obviously long since has that argument kind of died
Waned.
off.
Yeah.
I
Right.
feel right, but
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. It is an age old argument as far as to that end or the advent, but you're right. It definitely
well, and
waned.
now to that, I would say there's this part of me where I now feel like in order to sound modern, I'm using more digital tools. I'm feeling current because I've accepted it. I've learned to adopt them into my workflow. And now when I hear records that are being made currently that are done predominantly analog from a mix perspective, certainly front end is different tracking, we get really cool things
Mhm.
that way, but now those records are starting to sound old to me, even though it's modern music that might be made digitally being mixed on a console. I now feel like now we're starting to get into this, oh, that thing that I love now is starting to sound and feel old to me, so like it's changed.
Right.
Somehow I now like the immediacy, and I guess it feels immediate and urgent. The more, I hate using the term digital, but it is. I mean, everything that we're doing is predominantly digital, but there's something about that feels inherently modern. And now I think there can be a marriage of those things, and it's certainly gray and not black and white. But for the most part, it's more, now digital sounds current and modern and right, whatever
Mhm.
that means.
Sure. Well, I guess leads us to a question here. It's like, how would you describe your approach or philosophy to mixing and production?
Great question. And I've recently been trying to think of a better way to answer this. I used to be I used to obsess over what was the vocal chain during tracking, what was it during mixing, what was on the master for processing, was it recorded on a console, was it recorded to 2-inch, like what room were the drums cut in, who was the session player because that snare sounds incredible, and all of the things that are part of like learning and growing in this environment were things that were part of my process.
Hmm.
And the longer I've been afforded the luxury to be able to do this, I have noticed that what is happening for me, and it's like on a cellular level, is how do I feel about this? What's the gut feeling? And what's birthed out of that, I'm oversimplifying obviously and distilling it down, but like what's birthed out of that to me is it doesn't matter what I used or how I got
Hmm.
there. It's how do I feel, and how does the artist feel, and hopefully how does the end user or the listener feel, and how are they interacting with this art that we've created. And
Right.
when I gave myself the freedom to look at it from that perspective, two things happened. The amount of times that I would hear that from people that I respected and thought, you're just holding back all the secrets. Just give me some good stuff, right?
Right.
I more realized and recognized that no, that's the experience that we want to have. We want people to have an emotional connection with the art we're creating. And sure, might there be an absurd $25,000 vocal chain that happened? And is it part of the process? Yes. But at the
Right.
end of it, it doesn't really matter how you got there. It's how you got there, for yourself, and how you feel in the moment where you're ready to share that art with everyone else, which
Hmm.
why I say I'm trying to figure out a better way to sum it up is because it feels like now that's shrouded in mystery. But the truth is, I was saying this to a friend the other day again as well. One day I might pop a distressor or a CO1B on a vocal because I felt like it was needing something. And it's not necessarily even, there's not a word that's coming to mind or something tangible that is
Sure.
happening other than let's try this. I have stuff set up and I work in Pro Tools. It's set up as
Hmm.
inserts so I can pull it up just like a plugin and see how
Hmm.
it's doing a thing. And it might be that one day. And the next day, I might put L3 on a vocal to get
Sure.
a sound, right? And again, I think what was really eye opening and also kind of one of those Pandora moments for me was allowing myself to not abide by rules or structures that I thought had to be, you know, that I needed to abide by. I think
Hmm.
obviously there needs to be checks and balances. I want to make sure that gain staging is in place, and there is a technical aspect to it. I am not detracting from that part of it, but I think like I then have this voice tell me, hey, those rules were meant to be broken. And, it wasn't until I was willing to push beyond that construct that I really felt like
Hmm.
I was then part of stuff that I was having a really great emotional connection with, instead of the age old story of got finished a mix, took a listen to it in the car, was pretty happy, then threw on my favorite mix from X engineer and feel like I got my butt kicked and I should quit. Right. That's like
Right.
that thing that we all still do, to be fair. Let's
Right.
just call a spade a spade. But further than that was, I have so much more at my fingertips if I'm willing to let myself go off of feel, and
Yeah.
then in my downtime explore the technical things and learn new things and stay current on modern tools. Yes, of course, I would never want to take away from that. But at the end of it, I could know all of the things. I could like do the perfect math on gain staging and structure and phase alignment and everything else,
Right.
and it might not garner an emotional connection to the listener or to the artist, and then I failed. So it didn't matter that I did all those things perfectly, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting because something I've learned over the years, just from a variety of different situations I've been in, is that yeah, you could say, oh, it's a U67 into a 1073 followed by an LA2A, and sure, you could probably pull a litany of records that was the vocal signal chain for the record, and you will all say, oh, it sounds fantastic, it sounds great, but the U67 isn't the Swiss Army knife, like end all be all of microphones, fantastic as it may be as a microphone. I had a client that literally swore, like, it's the best mic I've ever used. I'm like, it's the wrong mic for your voice. Like, you don't sound good through this microphone. But they were
Right.
convinced that it had to be the thing. And I think to your point, like, it's some something that like was a little bit of a catchphrase for a while some years ago was something because of the idea of catching the the moment, like capturing the vibe or the spirit or the energy and of the art, was like your job isn't to be like the mad scientist per se of like, figuring out the protractor to the right angle of like the microphone placement. It's just like, put the mic down. Does this sound good there? Your job is to catch the baby. Like, that's all. That's it. You're there to put the mic in the right place, make everybody feel comfortable generally, and press record. And, hope you get the good performance. You have the wherewithal to say that was the take, that was the performance. Obviously, if you're working with a producer, maybe they're the ones, just their job then at that point. But yeah, it's like to catch the baby. And like, yeah, it's wonderful to have a room full of 1073s and U67s and U47s and all those, like, the usual suspects of coveted, classic gear. But I've heard records done with an arm, with a bucket load of SM57s and a Mackie console that would like rival something, like mixed and recorded on a Neve. Just, I know might seem like a stretch, but it's sort of like which one had the energy and like the vibe, and like, maybe that band might have sounded better that was recorded on SM57 with like a better studio, but maybe not. So, like,
Yeah,
Misfits,
and
like
to that end, I think immediately of two things. I can't remember which Tom Petty record it was, but it was mixed on a Soundcraft DC 2020, right?
yeah, yeah,
And it's Tom Petty, and none of us were like,
yeah,
"Oh my gosh, I can't believe that was done on a Soundcraft." No, it just
right.
it is what it is, and it worked. But I also think something that's come out of this, I will say, and I won't harp on the way that people are learning and the way that people now make records, but it is interesting to think about. And I wonder if it was in and around the time somebody like John Bonham they were cutting drums, because I think there was this moment, and drums are specifically one that we struggle with a lot, right? There's a lot of mics, there's a lot of phase, there's
Mm-hmm.
so many things that come into play, close mics, room mics, everything else. And I think we listen to Zeppelin and we think Bonham must have just been smashing the cymbals, right? And and then you go see a live show, and live drummers are there. They can hit the drums really, really, especially an outdoor venue or a big theater or
Right.
something like that. There's control and they can really smash them. But those records weren't recorded that way, right? In fact, I think it was the
Right.
opposite. You learn to sell. You learn to have your own dynamics and play dynamics
Mm-hmm.
in a certain way. And yes, did they over compress a mic up in the rafters and get, when the levee breaks? Yes, but he wasn't
Right.
absolutely annihilating the drums. He was dynamically controlling himself and playing. And I think that there's
Mm-hmm.
something there that hopefully, and maybe 32-bit float changed everything and now there's unlimited headroom in digital. But I just think like there is that, and I'm guilty as well. I certainly don't know all the ins and outs and the nuances that are involved in real high level engineering. I'd like to think I know enough to be able to cut records fine. I do. I feel confident in that role, but then there's still that part of what is the next generation, and maybe it won't matter. I don't know, but I just feel like that's one thing where, and I know that there's schools for that, but just the what it looks like to make records currently and understand. It sounds funny because I'm like almost contradicting myself from earlier, saying I want to know the technique. Certainly, it needs to be there, and then I want to throw it out and be able to just grab from colors and create and go off of gut. But I think like in the tracking side of things, it's more important to, that I this happened today, so it's clearly in my mind. Sometimes I'll get a
Sure.
vocal and it'll come in at like -30, so quiet, and this is like a tracked vocal, and I'll then need to, clip gain it up and see what's going on. And of course, as soon as you do that, the noise floor is pure
Right. Right.
insanity, and you just have all this hiss and static, and then the opposite, something will come in and like transients will be shaved off the top because it's just so loud that it's just pure clipping.
Right. Right.
And and then of course everything in between. But so I think that there's like, how do we, I want people to be able to be creative and exploratory and do the thing that they're going to do within their workstations or however they're creating their art. But then there's like, how do we carry on the legacy of quality engineering,
Hmm.
what does that look like anymore? Again, maybe I just date. I'm 45, so maybe I just dated myself and showed that maybe I'm not as current as I think I am.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd like indict yourself in such a way to say that you're not as current. I mean, there's things you learn that maybe you learned 20 years ago that stuck with you, and then to your point you were saying before about using modern tools makes you feel like you're more up to date, which I think is very true. Like, I've used to be such a gear nerd. Like I used to, tons and tons of like outboard gear I collected over the years. And nowadays I'm like finding myself not using a lot of that stuff. It's sort of like just kind of like, oh man, I guess I'm just using plugins a lot more, and I'm just sort of happy with the way that they sound. Like, like I
Yeah.
won't. I'll put it without saying which one it is. Just out of respect, I had a pair of compressors that Universal Audio make plugins of, and I was like, oh, I really wonder how close they got to this plugin. And I did a test where I ran the same signal, level matched everything, ran it through, flipped the phase inside of like the my DAW, and it disappeared. And I'm like turned the volume all the way up, and that was about the time where I was like, okay, there's the difference. Like the sum canceled, but there was just a side, and I'm like, is that noise floor because I've got my monitor controller knob like literally all the way up, or is that actually such an insignificant like difference? It was to the point that the next day those things were on reverb. Like, and I've
Yeah.
been using the plugin since, and I'm like, well, that just makes my life a lot easier that I don't have to remember settings on, like that compressor when I'm, coming back to some project 2 months later. So I think to the point, like, using modern tools is sort of how you kind of stay on top. Like the applications don't change all that much. I don't know that like the science of putting microphones in front of sources is all that much different like now than it was 50 years ago. I mean, physics is still physics. It's still like you still have to worry about phase and all your different and positioning. And okay, maybe we have more microphones, so there's okay, maybe you're not entirely sure what the voicing of that microphone is quite like, but still this, you could walk into a room and be like, oh, I'll put a microphone on that basically 6 inches from here, and go and move on to the next thing. I don't see that changing. So I don't know that saying, that's why I just don't think it's a fair thing to say to yourself, like, oh, maybe because I'm 45, like I'm 48, like, it's the same thing.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
a lot of stuff I learned, like you and I might both know how to do certain things that modern engineers don't know how to do because they haven't been put in that like position or in that scenario, but that doesn't necessarily make us dinosaurs. So it's a little bit of a
Right.
long-winded
Right.
rant
No, 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 it's good. And I
to
think it's important too because, to that end, I've found myself to go even further into that. I found myself using tools now that are, it's kind of comical because all along I've been searching for like what cool plugin to do this or what piece of gear or whatever it might be, and now you would look at a session for me, whereas before it might have complicated routing and all these auxes doing cool things, and I might have a chain of like 7 different things just for a delay instead of just using a delay. And
right.
recently it's been like, oh man, EQ. It's like you can do so much. You can do everything with an EQ. Like really
Yeah, yeah.
truthfully, and other problem solving tools need to be involved, of course, but for the most part, that's what I've come back to.
Hmm.
And and two things happened. One, I know we have amazing computers and processing, but certainly my sessions got way leaner and meaner when I stopped having all these convoluted routings. And I would look at my delay compensation, and it would have been red 3 hours before I was even at the place that I was at. Um, and now it's not the case. Now it's like, oh, I'm using less and less, and I'm more confident in my mixes, certainly, and
Mm.
I feel like I'm in a much better spot. And maybe that's a chicken or the egg. Maybe because the longer I get to do this, I'm thinking about things differently.
Sure.
I've often thought, and it's not my analogy, but we can teach technique all day long, right? And people, for the most part, can pick up on technique. Taste is impossible to teach. And
Mm.
what you like and what the natural curve of your ear is, or how you like your art to sound, is different than me. And that
Mm.
is our fingerprint. That is our signature at that point in time. And that can't be taught, right? That's in you. That's
Yeah.
years of listening to things, and it can be like how you take your coffee and what you like to eat and what kind of music you listen to or what kind of art you like to look at, and all of these things come into what is your taste. And that, to me, that's what pays dividends, because I want to be able to again, I come back to that gut thing. I want to send a mix back to a client or to an artist, to a producer, and have them have that feeling that I'm also having, or that they had maybe about their art, and they weren't able to get it across the finish line for whatever the reasons might be. um I think that to me is what I am really fired up about at this moment in time. And, a byproduct of being that way has been, it's like EQ everywhere, lots of
Yeah.
EQ.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of funny that you bring that up because it sort of preempts my next question a little bit. Because for me, I have quasars in my setup, like you have quasars, and like ever since I've been working on them, and I really I had ATCs before. I really enjoyed my ATCs, and they did wonders for me. But like I use compression a whole lot less and EQ a whole lot more nowadays than I ever did before. And it's your point. It's like, yeah, you could pretty much do just about everything with an EQ. So, yeah. So, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess, go ahead.
I was gonna,
I was just,
further to that. I have a friend that is on, real high end PMCs. He's out in LA, does a lot of mix work, and he was talking to me. And at the time, I I was on SCM 25s solely, and he used them, and then he also got the larger PMCs, and he was saying to me, what was so striking was what you're saying, like being able to think about compression differently and hearing things that you wouldn't necessarily hear. What's comical is, right, then we turn around after we're done and the end user ends up on,
right, right.
this or a phone, and you'd think, oh, we're never going to listen in this environment and to this level. But I do believe that it informs you to have a totally different experience for the end user. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know what question you're going to ask next, but I remember as soon as the Quasars were in this room, I listened. It sounds like such a cliche catchphrase, but I listened to music, and certainly my mixes, that day for the first time, almost,
Mhm.
um, because I was able to hear. There's a lot of artifacting and certainly phase stuff, and headroom things that I just, and again, I love the 25s, and I still have them here. I think they're complementary to the Quasars, um,
Mhm.
for very different reasons. But I was able to hear things, moves that I did, how I overcooked something and didn't necessarily need to do it, and all of the things started happening. And of course, it wasn't like at once and I couldn't articulate it immediately. It was over the course of really starting to get to know these monitors, where
Mhm.
I was instantly like, man, I don't need to work as hard as I was working. I still need to work hard, but it's almost
Right.
like, I guess that's a wrong way to say it. It's better to put it this way. I was able to work faster because I wasn't rabbit holing as much. And so
Mm.
I could then rely on gut and taste, two things which, I'm, by this point of the interview,
Right.
I'm, hypersensitive
Big
to.
on. Yeah.
And I
Right.
think what comes with that is, I think you lose perspective. The longer we're in a session, certainly from a mix perspective, the longer we're there and we're like really obsessing over certainly minute details, but even overall macro stuff, the I feel like it's the quicker we're no longer going to have perspective and be able to be fresh and think about
Hmm.
things from that gut and that feel perspective. And now I'm protective of how much time I want to spend. I want to listen to a rough. I want to know where everyone was happy with it. But then I'm almost like, I just need to get this session going and get going quickly. Whereas
Hmm.
in the past, I might have spent more time, you know, trying to figure stuff out. I feel like I'm able to trust my gut and move forward and stay fresh with the quasars in a way that I've never experienced before.
The question just for posterity's sake is could you explain how Ex Machina speakers have impacted your process? So in there you answered it. So like I said, that the last bit of the conversation preempted the actual
Yeah.
question.
Well, no, because to speak to that further is so interesting because I was on this journey where I was trying to. I have a really well treated room. I built this room. It was the first room I built when we moved to Nashville. Out of the whole studio, I have a separate cutting room, and there's a lounge area. I'm very fortunate to have the amount of space that I have and call it my studio. But when I was building the mix room, again, I really like a short decay. I really like a short return time in a room. I've always
Hmm.
appreciated that. And so I really wanted that, which means I know that it's treated well. Certainly shot the room a few times and seen where any of the flaws of the room might be, but the putting the quasars in for the very first time. And I'll say two things, and maybe this answers even more questions. I hope I'm not getting too far ahead, but I also was on a journey where why I have the ATCs, why I had NS10s, why I worked on things that were true analog monitors was because I kept trying DSP based monitors and felt like I was in I don't know, this is not a good descriptor, but the Matrix. It didn't feel
Hmm.
like right to me. Something felt off. And I would hear like, uh, you know, these units that you could put on and you could like make a sweet spot and you're using correction. And it just felt like I had allergies and I was kind of like my ears sounded like I was underwater a little bit and it sounded clear and it was cool because there's a realistic or a hyper realistic, you know, high def thing that's happening and it's
Hmm.
cool. Some of it's
Yep.
cool. And then the rest of it, I was like, man, I'm laboring to hear through this thing that feels wrong to my brain. And so it was against my better judgment to have anything come in that had DSP, right? For those
Sure.
very reasons. Um, but then a couple, friends of mine had heard the quasars um, and said, "You have to hear these. I am blown away by what they do, specifically because we all feel similarly about how DSP sounds, at least to us, right?" And so I remember bringing
Hmm.
them in and being skeptical and putting them on. And first of all, it's the first time I don't actually hear DSP at all. I know it's there. I know it's mad science going on inside these things, right? Um, but at the same time it's not like that's something that I'm aware of. And I was
Hmm.
going into it thinking I'm going to hear this, it's going to be another one of those stories where I don't like this monitor because of. Instead what I got was, and I'm not dissing any other monitors that I've used, so please know that that's not where it stems from, but it was
Sure.
almost like I had been watching a tube TV and you showed me 4K, and it was that big of a jump. It's not like I went from 720p or 1080 and instantly to 4K. It's like I went from a tube television, low
with
res
the wood
to
with.
this. Yeah, you know the one I mean, right? And then I was able to all of a sudden have unbelievable detail, and but also like I don't know, not like normal detail, not like the normal, and certainly, again, not something that I felt was hindering me listening to and being part of the music. It's totally different than any other experience, any other DSP based monitors that I had heard. And certainly after using them for several days, I wasn't fatigued. That's another thing that I found. I could get crazy clarity, still the same low end, and be listening so quiet, which
Mm.
for long days is is life changing, right? My because I got to keep these things working well.
Right,
So
right,
to be
right.
able to monitor quiet and still feel like, because there was something that would happen with me where I was really trying to dial in big drums or bass and kick and that relationship and or low end in records. I would always have to be hot, 110 dB, even if it's for a few minutes, to get what that relationship feels like. And I find that, well, it's still fun to do that. And certainly these can go way loud. I'm able to make those decisions confidently at really quiet levels as well. I still will turn them up. I'll still have fun with them because they can do it. But at the same time,
Hmm.
I'm able to make really critical, important decisions at a very low SPL, which also just doesn't happen, or not in my experience with a lot of other monitors.
Hmm. Cool. Wow. I mean, that's a great, that's a great insight. I appreciate that. So, are there any upcoming projects that you or collaborations you could share with us that you're excited about?
Sure, yeah. I think I mentioned that I work a lot in rock. Obviously, the Thousand of Crutch project, this re-release has been a lot of fun. I'm excited about it for two very different reasons. One from the engineering perspective, but also another because of the history that I have with the band. I will say, two guys in particular, and actually Mark Siegel, a producer that I do a lot of mixes
Hmm.
for, has just started his Quasar journey as well, and so he's super excited on it. And then another guy, Andy Sheridan, in town. Both of these guys that I mix with a lot. I'm always just the relationship of producer and mix engineer to me. I don't know. It's like to be lockstep. That's something that I'm very excited for. I'm fortunate to be in a town where there are a lot of great producers.
Yep.
So I'm always excited to be working on mix stuff. And then, but being in a town that has a lot of country, I have been spending some time in that world. And so this artist, Nate Smith, that I have done we've had a good history together over the past, I want to say, 4 years. And it's amazing to see just what that has meant to him being in this town and being the true, authentic, being that he is and the voice that
Hmm.
he is. I'm always excited to be working on stuff with him as well. But to be honest, I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this, Dan. Like, we get to do such incredible stuff, and the fact that we get to create art and be part of the communities that we're a part of from this perspective, I'm
Yep.
excited about all of it. It's like so hard to narrow it down because I'm just so excited to be able to get back down here every day and be part of something that moves a needle, hopefully, and makes me feel good when I listen to it, and same for client and artist. And I just love that so much. I'm so grateful to be able to do
Nice.
that.
Yeah, it's definitely a privilege to be able to hear. Like I like sometimes, for me, especially in the last, I would say in the last the last few years of my music side of things, I've done a lot more remix work where I've like done sort of rewriting and like a lot of electronic stuff. But I did a couple actually about 10 years ago at this point. I did a remix for a Brazilian artist who actually the first time I ever DJ'd in Brazil. our first tour I ever did down there. I played a festival with her. I had no idea who she was or how big she was, but she's huge. Like the festival had like 30,000 people on it, and she was the headliner. And then fast forward some years later, I ended up doing a remix. And when they sent me the actual original, like the original recording, like all the multi-track, just to be able to sit down and listen to her voice like in the studio and just really appreciate how like professional she was and whatnot. It was like it just felt like a moment almost that like I mean cliche, but it's like just like a moment that I shared with her in that, obviously like she was in the studio with other people at the time well before I got, anywhere near the multi tracks, but it was just to have that experience felt like I shared it with her, as maybe the
Yeah.
other people that were there that day. So that's
You
always
know,
something I've enjoyed about.
you say that, and I immediately think there's this artist, Abby Anderson, who's a Texan originally. She's here in Nashville now, and we've done an EP together that I think the full thing releases next month. But, she is one of these people, similar to what you were just describing, where she comes into the room and just could pick up an acoustic guitar or sit at the piano, start playing and singing. And it's like, holy crap, quick, let me grab a mic and just record this right now because
Right, right.
it sounds incredible. And it seems
Right.
so effortless for her. And that's a true joy to be able to, um, witness and experience and on such a level where you're like, holy smoke, this is a gift. This person is
Yeah.
sharing their gift, and I get to sit here. And so, I hope to work with her indefinitely forever, because it's just such a treat to be able to have somebody be confident in their instrument, have that pure authenticity, and just be able to open their mouth and sing in a room and be like, man, I just got to stay out of the way of this and record it.
Catch the
Just
baby.
capture this,
Catch the
right?
baby. Yeah.
Catch the baby, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great interview. I've enjoyed it. I guess lastly, before we wrap up, like where can people find out more about you, like social media, website, etc.?
Yeah, so I do have a website. I'm pretty, it's more of a landing page. I tend to live mostly in Instagram. So, yeah, my
Mm-hmm.
handle for Instagram is just at Joel Bruyere. And then my website is www.joelbruyere.com. I need to probably do better
Cool.
with it, but it is a landing page, and at least can take you to, some reels either on Spotify or Apple Music. I'm starting to get a little bit better with like Muso.ai and Jaxta and all these other, credit services, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
remarkable. I think it's great in a time where we have mostly digital liner notes
Sure.
now, for it to
Right.
really
Right.
be, the metadata to be available for people who want to look that stuff up. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, mostly Instagram.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I guess that's awesome. Well, I'll when we post this, I'll make sure to link the like in the video and everything. I'll link to your Instagram and to the site as well if people want to check it out. But other than that, I really want to say thank you. This has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again for having remarkable tools that help me love what I do even more, and being such an amazing company. I can't speak highly enough, and so thanks. I'm flattered that you would want to take the time to interview me and let me pander on about nothingness for a while. So thank you. I really
Nice.
respect and appreciate you all so much.
Thank you, Joel. It's been a pleasure for me, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy this interview. So it's been actually
Awesome.
it's been jam packed with some cool, interesting little some insights and stuff that you shared. So very much appreciated.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Well, we'll catch up soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Take care, Joel.
You too.